Hey, Paul.
Hi, how are you?
I'm doing great. How about yourself?
I'm doing well, thank you. Thanks for the invitation to talk.
Absolutely, absolutely. Why don't we jump right into it then? Tell us a little bit about yourself and your organization and what you're passionate about.
Sure. Uh, Paul Kinghorn. I serve as the director of the Center for Business Growth and Innovation at the University of Northern Iowa. Also serve as the intellectual property officer for the university. So been an entrepreneur, been in business, supporting businesses my entire career. The passion I think I have clearly is for startups and for existing operations to be able to employ better processes. I tell people, I raised my hand to the square when asked who amongst us has made every mistake one could possibly make when running a business. It's not a badge of honor, and I wished I was smart enough to figure it out on my own, not to have made those mistakes. But now that I have that experience and wisdom and my staff, our job is to help others avoid those same pitfalls.
Fantastic. So do you work with student startups, or do you work with any startups, or who do you work with typically?
That's a good question. So within our institution, we've kind of divided two different centers. Mine is outwardly focused to the community. We do have another group that we work closely with that works inwardly to help support students in their education and also a business startup. So we primarily, I tell people we work with clients anywhere from the idea stage all the way to exit.
And it works for both internally within the school and out externally, like anybody can join?
That's correct. So one of my roles, the intellectual property officer, is to help identify research that is got some IP associated with it and protect and commercialize that. So that's an inward focus. But predominantly my day job is working with business owners throughout the state of Iowa, but we don't limit it just to Iowa, helping them with their operations.
So what's a typical suite of services that you would offer businesses?
I don't know that we think of it quite that way. I tend to think of it in kind of vertical focuses, if you'll allow me. So one focus is helping those family-run businesses and all the challenges and the nuances that they encounter. So we tell people, if you want to have an exciting Thanksgiving or Christmas meal, don't plan and think through what your family governance is going to be and don't have your systems in place. That's about the surest bet that you'll get a Jerry Springer-like outbreak to come out. So we try to guide people through that. How do you do it so that you don't have those moments and the dining room and the boardroom don't start getting blurred and feelings and actions start to come out and play themselves out either in the workplace or in the home environment. So that's one focus. The other focus that we're passionate about and see a huge problem with is the challenge with business transition. One of the stats I like to tell people is 2/3 of all businesses that have at least one employee are owned by a baby boomer. I tell people I'm the tail end of the baby boomer generation, and no one looks at me and thinks I'm a spring chicken. And so if I represent the tail end of that generation, 2/3 of whom own these companies and have not properly planned for or in the process of transitioning out of their business, we have a serious tsunami that's waiting to have an economic negative impact if we don't get it right. So we have services that help those businesses plan for and think through what that transition looks like, as well as younger business owners. I frequently hear from them and they say, well, why would I care about that? Well, because you never know when an opportunity is going to come for someone to acquire you. And if you planned your business and your exit properly and you run it in such a way, you're going to get top dollar. Or you can choose not to, and you can stay in the business and be flattered that the offer came and continue to do what you're doing. The other two areas that we have, one is in the new venture and entrepreneur space. So we have programs that support the earliest what we call wantrepreneurs. A lot of people use that term negatively. I use it as we all had to at some point have an interest and a desire and had to learn. So whether we're seen as kicking tires or just going through the discovery process, we have programs to help those individuals. And then the one that I have a great deal of passion for is around business growth through innovation. So how do we incorporate innovation and all that it entails to help make our operations more sound, more structurally profitable, sustainable, and gives us an edge, competitive edge.
It's interesting you should mention I think of them as armchair entrepreneurs. Like they read a lot of Entrepreneur magazine, and they think about building businesses, and they at one day they say, I'm going to go out there and do something. How do you help them? I mean, do you help guide them into entrepreneurship, or do you help steer them away from it if it's not for them? I mean, how does that work?
Yeah, no, that's an excellent question. A lot of the programs are one of these, scared straight type thing, right? We're gonna tell you what it really is like to be an entrepreneur, right? And only the stoutest amongst us are going to stand afterwards, and then we blessed them or christened them that they're good enough to move forward with it. I find that mentality a little bit offensive. And the reason is everybody's at a different stage. Everybody looks for the startup or whatever their desired business start, the goal and objective they're trying to get from it slightly differently. So we don't try to presuppose what you should want to get out of starting a business. We just want to help you be realistic in what you get. I tell people the businesses that I've started, been involved with, the absolute most enjoyable time I've ever had in my career. I mean, absolutely ate it up, enjoyed it to no end. It is also some of the most frustrating times that I've ever experienced, and I mean, to the brink of almost broke. I mean, it is the roller coaster of all roller coasters, and I know there's people out there that's not their case. The Midas touch, they touch it, it goes right away, or others, and I think for most people, it's more my experience, right, where you get in there and you learn some stuff, and okay, you lick your wounds, and you have enough distance between what happened that you can actually own a lot of the problems on yourself, and it's not everybody else's fault. And then you come back a second time and a third time, and eventually you get it where it takes off and has some successes. So we tell these business startups, that these earliest people, we just try to help them understand the reality of what they're going to get into, and then with that as the framework, help guide them through whatever their dream or their passion is.
It's interesting you should mention like the older entrepreneur, because I'm in that place as well, and it seems like we never seem to get featured anywhere. It's always like the teen or the 20-year-old who's like done this and done that. And I remember being in the library the other day, and it says confessions of a teen entrepreneur and all this amazing stuff this guy did before he turned 20. And like, you're never going to see a book talking about the older entrepreneur and what amazing things they've done, are you?
So it turns out if you were to take age, say between 18 and 65, and I know that there's entrepreneurs that are younger than or older, but if we were to take that swath, and if you were to divide them into 4 equal age groups, as it goes through there, the number of entrepreneur startups is evenly distributed through each of those groups. So to your point, in fact, the average age of a startup is in their 40s, early 40s. So most people don't think that. They think of college kids, which is great if you're a college student, have that passion, and you don't have some of the encumbrance. You're used to sleeping on a couch and eating ramen noodles and whatever, and so you're willing to continue to do that. Whereas if you're older in life and you have a family, you still have a mortgage, you have other obligations. You can't just do it that way. What we find with older entrepreneurs that is actually to their advantage is they have a better understanding of the problem or the issue that they're trying to solve, because they live in it. They see it every day, and they're frustrated that there isn't a solution. And so they've experienced this. They have firsthand experience. They have industry contacts. They usually have more resources that they can bring to bear. And that resources is cash and capital, but it's also connections and relationships. And so when they start, they still have failures. And I don't want to suggest that it's not going to be fallen, but by and large, they have greater chance of success.
So are you finding that some of these older entrepreneurs sort of got into that position that because they became sort of unemployable, like they got to a certain point within their lives, and it's not an age thing, I think it's an experience thing, where corporates are looking at them and going, this guy's probably going to be too expensive, and he knows too much, and he doesn't really act like an employee, he's more like a consultant, so we'll hire him as a consultant, but we don't see him as a full-time worker. Do you see a lot of entrepreneurs in that kind of space?
Yeah, so we like to refer to those as, opportunistic. The opportunity was given to them, right? They got the pink slip or this most recent COVID shutdown. In fact, we're seeing a blip, and I read
Love
an article.
how positive you are about this. This is great.
I read an article that just recently, within the last week or so, talking about how this is different, right? This time it's different because, and they went on to list all the reasons it's different. But the truth of the matter is, it isn't. Anytime there's an economic downturn, and you can go all the way back to each of the recessions that we've had, documented recessions of substance, and you see that there is an uptick in entrepreneurial activity, because these individuals may or may not have been given prior thought to starting a business, but all of a sudden they have not much choice, right? They don't have the job that they're banking on. They realize they have some skills and some ability to contribute, and there aren't a lot of jobs they could just jump right into. And so as a means of necessity, they have to start out. When the economy is actually going quite well and unemployment is low, we tend to see a slack in entrepreneurial activity, because there's lots of alternatives that people have. And they might try it, but they won't stay at it as long, because as a general rule, it's not easy to be in business, which is another misnomer that I think a lot of people have. They drive by and they see these operations, these businesses, and it might be Main Street or lifestyle businesses or names that they recognize through advertising, what have you. And they just think, well, these guys are making it hand over fist. Well, it turns out, a lot of them aren't, right? I mean, they could, in many cases, just as easily go work for somebody and make more money, better benefits, but it's a lifestyle choice. They're passionate. They love the control, the freedoms that it comes with, and they're willing to trade that off.
Yeah, I think a lot of times we have this sort of sheen of amazingness on people's lives. You see it on Facebook, you see it when people start businesses, especially all the entrepreneur stuff that goes on online. They're like, oh, I made $1 million this year, or I made 250,000, or I'm in 6 figures, 7 figures, whatever. But we don't know how much they actually made at the end of the day. I mean, I think I was reading something the other day where somebody said, oh, he makes $250,000 a year selling domain names, but it costs him $125,000, $130,000 a year to maintain the ones that he hasn't sold, right? But we don't hear that story. We just hear about the story where here I made 6 figures or 10 figures or 7 figures or whatever, but we don't hear the negative side. It's kind of like, it's so weird. It's like when it comes to entrepreneurial news, it's the opposite of it bleeds leads. Like we don't get bad news, we get amazing news. When we hardly ever hear about the bad news.
Well, that also speaks to the comment you made earlier about entrepreneurs who we tend to see make their way into our normal visibility, right? So it's the tech-led innovators, the ones that are real flashy and exciting to watch and see. And that's fine. I mean, they certainly represent a segment of the entrepreneurial ecosystem. But by and large, the majority of business owners, they're not rolling in it hand over fist. They're not making tons and tons of money. I mean, they're valuable to our communities. I mean, every one of us, considers these local entrepreneurs in one way or another to be the seasoning of our communities, right? There's what makes our towns, our cities, our communities unique and fun to visit, as opposed to these commercial conglomerates which I have no problem with that either. I mean, there's a role for everything in it, but by and large, they're not the ones who usually need our help the most.
Absolutely. So one of the things you were mentioning here was that it's hard to bring innovation back into SMEs, like small to medium-sized enterprises. But I mean, I thought small to medium-sized, or at least small enterprises, were like rife with innovation. I mean, they have no trouble innovating. Is that not the case?
Well, that's interesting. So as I shared that with you, I knew that would probably, wait a minute, reintroducing it. I thought that they're supposed to start out. Well, the data suggests that when a business starts, right, the founder or founders typically find some way, especially the ones that are successful now, find some way to be different or unique in the marketplace, right? We consider that innovation, right? Whether it's the product, the service, how they deliver it, or some aspect of it. As they start operating,
something unique about what they do that sort of makes them stand out and actually brings business to them.
Right. If they're just another copycat of somebody else, why should I change my behavior as a consumer to go to you? I'm already having, that service provided by this other competitor. So unless they come up with a substantial way to differentiate in a meaningful way, right, to make me want to use them, something about it is better. It could be more convenient, it could be less price costly, it could be more feature laden, it could be really disruptive, something completely different solution to how you solve that problem, or give me an opportunity to go after. So they had that initially, but then as they start to get traction and they realize they have to get into operational mode, then you start to see innovation falter. They double down on the efficiency, and occasionally, and I'd say rarely, but occasionally it could be operational efficiency, but usually that's not what they're doing. They're just doubling down on trying to maximize their efficiency to increase their profits and maintain some kind of a growth, all within the need to keep a positive cash flow. And so that's what's happened. And so frequently what happens is by the time they take the time to stick their head up above the fray and really look at their business, it might be 5-10 years down the road. And they realize, and usually at that point, what's happened is they realize things aren't as nice now as they once were, right? So my sales have plateaued or they're in decline or some other major challenge. And that's when they start wondering, why did we get, or how did we get into this position and how do we get out of it? And the interesting thing is what we find, generally speaking, while they were very innovative initially, they weren't innovators. In other words, they didn't have that mindset. They just happened to trip across it and accidentally. So if asked to duplicate or repeat what it is that they did to be able to, bring that life innovations, bring that charge back into their company, they couldn't tell you how to do it because that's not how they started. It just happened by chance that they got an innovative product or service that the market was responsive to.
It's interesting because you make it sound like luck. How much does luck actually come into this?
Well, sadly, a lot, right? It's our market does not discriminate. I mean, a good idea is a good idea, whether you accidentally came across it or whether you intentionally put lots of time and effort into it. That's not to say people don't think about or try to intentionally design something. I think that we all, to one degree or another, are trying to conjure up what we think the market really wants. There is no question. So this is kind of the balance between art and science, right? How much of entrepreneurship is science and how much of it is art? And I would argue both, right? You have to have some sense of, and we know from studies out there that about 3% of the entrepreneurs are just this naturally gifted, call it the Midas touch, right? They don't necessarily know how they are. They're the Michael Jordan, they're the Wayne Gretzky's. They're just great at it. And if you ask them how to do it, they couldn't tell you. They just are really good at doing it and they just do it. But 97% of us, that's not us, right? And so then do we assume that 97% of us are destined to fail and struggle? Or have we learned some new systems and processes that if we apply them could give us an advantage, right? Or at least give us help to move forward. One of the things I love about the field of entrepreneurship is even though we've been dealing with capitalism for millennia, this isn't a new concept. These aren't Paul Kinghorn's principles that are coming lately, right? We have learned a lot more about what it takes to be successful in starting and supporting small businesses. And that's just come along in the last decade or two. It's really challenging the way we go about thinking about a startup, the way we go about supporting them, the way we give them tools to help them in their own operation. The key there, more than anything else, isn't whether we can help them or how we can help them. It's someone has to be willing to receive help, right? And it's that coachability piece. And I can't care more about it than they do, and I can't help them be coachable. So that's kind of the success indicator that we see. So back to your how much of it's luck versus not. I've heard people say, you make your own luck through your hard work and your perseverance. 100% agree with that. But some of it is just downright serendipity, right? You're in the right place, right time. Things happen for you, and you're able to take advantage of it.
Yeah, I think a lot of times it just comes down to timing, right? I mean, the product is either it's too early or it's too late, but if it hits just the right moment, then it's uptaken. And I think the other piece of it is if it's got especially nowadays when the internet is so crowded with so many messages, if you have something to like blow the horn and go, hey, this is here, whether you bring in a celebrity or like it's featured on Oprah or something like that, something like drives it up into the stratosphere, because if you don't have that, you almost don't have anything. It's almost more important to have some kind of vocalization of the product or something promoting the product than actually having the product itself.
Well, and so we tend to see one of two things. Either people are really big on the product itself, right? Its features, its benefits, and it's never quite right. They're always focusing on the product. And not surprisingly, they frequently struggle. right? Often don't succeed. Or we see the other side, which is they come up with this great fanfare and people are all excited. That's a really cool idea. But when you get up close to it and you know, to use the analogy of an automobile, you lift the hood, no engine, look inside the interior, it's not there. We're like, wait a minute, what's really here? But the people who can understand, this is why in our world, we use this term called minimum viable product, right? What's the minimum you have to put forth that'll get somebody to pay you for it, right? So they're willing to vote on your idea by virtue of paying for it, that will meet their need and can establish some kind of a transactional relationship. And then you can work on perfecting it. What happens so often is people conjure up version 10, right? They think of Windows 10, oh, I got to go right to this full featured, full laid and just complete, without any comprehension of how many, you know, hundreds, thousands of people are working on Windows 10 to get it where, and say nothing about the 2.5 decades of evolution that product had to go through.
Are you finding that, I don't know if this is a trend, but are you finding that it's design over function now? Is like, if as long as the damn thing looks good, that people are more likely to pick it up than if it's functional but it doesn't look great?
You know, that's an interesting question. So it depends on who you're talking about. If somebody has enough resources, right, financial backing, then we tend to see that they're spending a significant amount into the user experience, right? They're actually taking the time to think through that. Now whether that user experience outruns the coverage, so to speak, of the features and what the tool or the product can actually do, I guess we could argue on that one. But most of the smaller businesses don't have the resources, and it's all they can do to scrape together a product. And frequently they don't go to the source, the customer, to understand what the customer need, desire, and interaction is. In fact, they are often the ones that will get frustrated and even complain that the customer's not using their product right. And we have to say, whoa, slow down here. Are they using it? Yeah. Well, understand why and how they're using it. Because it could very well be that they're telling you something pretty substantial. And if you only listen to them and could double down, you'd find that value proposition that they're using, and you'd be able to really hone in on that market segment and then extend it and expand your opportunity. But they want to fight it. No, that's not how I envisioned it. Well, the one thing you can do is you can control the product and service that you bring to the market. What you can't control is how the market receives it or interacts with it.
Right. But kind of like nowadays, it seems to me that a beautiful looking app or a beautiful looking website is like table stakes, right? I mean, if you go to somebody's website and it looks like it's from 92, you know, people are going to be like, you know, I'm not going to work with those guys. I got to have something up to date and it looks great. And it's got to be on par with these sites that, you know, could be worth a ton more. Are you seeing that as well?
So we like to refer to that as, you know, the price to ante up, right? So, you know, it used to be you didn't have to have those things. You know, oh, I don't need a website. I don't need, you know, nowadays that's, you know, that's the least amount you have to. Now it doesn't have to be, you know, full featured and you know, heavy code written with back end, you know, databases and interaction, all those kind of components, especially if that's very costly for what you need to do. But it needs to at least speak to, and it needs to look like someone would expect, because so much of what we judge, you know, kind of the book on its cover type of a thing, we judge a company and that product by what it looks like in its materials to market to us. Now, one of the problems that you run into is some people are more focused on that, which I think is what you're getting to, and they have this facade that looks really nice, and then when you go to see the product, it underperforms, right? In other words, it feels like they've overpromised and underdelivered. And so that is counterproductive unto itself. But it also doesn't help if you pull together a website that, you know, might have been cutting edge in '98, but by today's standards is antiquated and less.
Yeah, I think you're kind of right. It kind of works both ways, because you see some apps out there that are like look terrible, but people love them and use them, and others that look awesome and people love them and use them too. So it really all depends, you know, what function, what the customer is actually getting out of it, and you really do need that feedback loop so you can continuously pivot to what the customer is looking for. Otherwise, you know, you may as well not bother.
Yeah, to that point, I don't know if you're familiar with Craigslist, but a lot of people use Craigslist across the nation. It is not the most technologically advanced site, you know, and
Nope.
it's look and feel and user, you know, every time I go there, I think, holy crud, you can't update this and make it easier, but they don't have to. I mean, you don't pay to post something on there, and, you know, I still go, right? And others do as
Yeah,
well.
unless it's a job posting. I think that's the only
Yeah.
thing that they charge for. But you're right. And you know what's interesting is I actually saw an article once that said all you have to, if you want a business idea, if you want to come up with a new business idea, just go to Craigslist and see what they do. And they had the homepage of Craigslist, and they had like all the different categories, and they circled it and said, oh, this is Airbnb. This is cars.com. This is like, so they use it as the sort of like the foundational stepping stone of every other service was something that Craigslist did at the beginning. And I think that was actually an interesting concept because everything that Craigslist does is useful. And all these other companies just sort of leverage off of that.
Mhm. And that's you know, quite intuitive, because here's the thing, there are very few really new, unique ideas out there. And a lot of people go around and say, I can't get into entrepreneurship. I'm not an innovator. I don't think that way. And I was having a conversation with somebody a few years ago, and we're walking through this head mall space. I said, it might shock you to know that there's incredible innovation in windows, right? And I'm pointing at the windows of a store. I said, and I just happened to be involved in a startup that was dealing with that. And I explained to him in great detail some of the innovation that was going, and it floored him. I said, it's not my innovation. I'm not the one that came up with Windows. I'm not, but it's the ability to take what everybody else would walk by and say, oh, it's, you know, it is what it is. It's been around forever, and seeing it in a different light and how you might be able to leverage that. And whether it's the product itself or whether it's the user experience, how someone goes about interacting with to get Windows placed in a home or a business or whatever, what you typically find is the greatest business opportunities are the ones where someone, to your point earlier, took this foundational idea that already existed and then really ran with it. And then moreover, allowed their brain to be very creative and think outside the box, right? They weren't using the paradigm or the construct that everybody else uses when thinking about this product, this service. They were saying, what if, why does it have to be this way? And so then you start getting things like telemedicine, you start getting things like Airbnb, you start getting things that are truly revolutionary, disruptive, could be game changer, but it could be more just breakthrough in terms of the way we think about. Like, no one would argue that there's high technology when it comes to Airbnb or Uber or Lyft, right? What they've done isn't substantial in technological lift. It's substantial and it's disruptive of existing systems that are out there. And what the world I live in with you know, universities and faculty that are just doing these really crazy, fantastic things, we would argue is very breakthrough, but it's hard to find its commercial relevance because it's so tip of the spear. You know, how do you take, I cracked an atom, and then, okay, so how do we make that commercially viable? And that's the challenge that we run into.
So I want to talk a little bit about what you were saying with corporate innovation, but can we like divert into IP just for a second? Because I've done a lot of IP myself. And I find that it's really interesting is that you have companies who say, yes, IP is super valuable and we really, really need to have a decent sized patent portfolio for both defensive and offensive reasons. And then you have the flip side where a lot of startups are like, you know, I don't have any money for that. I can't protect my IP. What do you say to that? I mean, how do they, and of course, the biggest question is, how can I value something like IP?
Yeah, that's a good question. So what I tell people is IP is basically evidence in court. So if you don't have the resources to be able to prosecute somebody who's going to infringe upon it or defend it, right? Then maybe there are other ways to protect your idea than going the patent route. And not that patents are crazy expensive, but for a startup who oftentimes is cash constrained, you know, that 20, 30, whatever $1,000 to get a patent. And that's just the filing. That doesn't include all the R&D that goes into getting up to that point to where it can be patented. May or may not be the best avenue. And it's the same thing we run into. You know, universities are notorious for having, you know, files full of IP that's available for license, right? And it's kind of sitting there without any call it orphaned IP, right? that it's difficult to get it out into the market, right, where someone's willing to take it, run with it. I would say the first thing I would caution somebody is don't assume that the patent is the panacea, because it might not be for a small firm that can't. Now, if you're a larger company and you have deeper pockets and are willing to do those things where you're going to keep it up to date and defend it and prosecute if anybody tries to infringe upon it, that's a great way to, as you pointed out earlier, either be offensive or defense in your strategy. Smaller companies probably need to think through that a little bit. Now, having said that, a lot of venture or equity, coming into a company wants to see that they have something that, is tangible and they get their hands on, and they like the idea that there's a patent or patents that are protecting it. So, but those same people that love that will run, and I mean not jog, but run away from any kind of legal confrontation, because they don't want their money to get sucked into a black hole where they're having to fight a legal battle. They want it to go
exactly right. Yeah, exactly right. So let's talk a little bit about, you mentioned here something about challenges to creating and implementing and sustaining an innovation initiative. And you're talking about small to medium sized enterprises. So if we go back to that company that you were talking about before, they're starting to grow, they're operationalizing, the money's coming in, the cash flow is good. How do you get them to, how do you convince a company like that to actually continue to have that open pipeline to innovation?
Yeah, that's, so this is, if you remember the book Good to Great by Jim Collins, this is the big challenge that everybody runs into, right? So things are going well. It's hard to want to challenge your own success, right? And if we see a company, Coke, remember the new Coke story, and
I remember New Coke.
We're old enough to remember that. And some would argue that maybe it was a marketing ploy or whatever, but I don't think so. I think that the Pepsi challenge, got them scared, and they were willing to take a chance and a risk. Well, so they came out with it, and of course it didn't turn successful, and then turned into this big debacle and embarrassing. Right. I'm sure people
can still spin. I think the other thing that's interesting is that whenever these debacles occur, they still seem to be able to spin it into something positive in the end, because it drives up more sales.
Sure. Yeah, it's the old any news is good news is drives sales type of thing. Well, so we don't reward. I guess what I'm trying to get at, we don't necessarily reward people who take risks if they fail. In fact, we're very quick to pull out our claws and take a swipe at somebody. That was so stupid. Anybody could see that, right? But the truth of the matter is, if you don't challenge status quo, if you don't challenge how you're doing business and operating, in spite of the fact that it might be going well for you right now, you're setting yourself up to some kind of to a future degradation of some kind, right? There will be some disruptive force that'll happen. The market will change its appetite, its desires, competitive force will come into play. So the challenge for well-run companies is to continue to look at and with an eye towards how they can improve. If you're not running, your company's not running particularly well, then it's a little bit easier, right? Because it's obvious this isn't satisfying our need. Maybe we're not as profitable. Maybe we're constantly fighting, cash flow issues, or we have this competitive threat that we can't seem to get around. So then they're, like I said earlier, more coachable. More coachable means they're more receptive too. But then we have this interesting paradox: is I don't know how to be innovative. And I can read all kinds of books. There's a ton of them out there, or watch videos or what have you, but that doesn't necessarily translate. It's like reading about sales, right? It doesn't make you a good salesperson. Reading, some of these philosophies or theories about, about innovation doesn't necessarily make you a good innovator. In fact, we would argue that it's more ingrained in who you are and in certain people. Now, some of those characteristics we can teach and instill in others, right? So that's the whole idea behind entrepreneurship and helping to have more of that culture and that mindset. But the truly successful companies have identified somebody or somebodies who have this different way of looking at their business. And that's why we tell people it might be that their best avenue of approach is to find somebody on the outside that they can partner with and help them with that, right? So if you have somebody on the outside, so what typically happens under that scenario is we have all these secrets, we know our customers best, and only we can innovate our way out of this. And there might be some truth to that if you have the right people and the right culture. But most companies don't have the right people and or the right culture. So in the absence of that, they sit there and they struggle and they get further and further behind. Whereas if they would find somebody on the outside, and I tell people, one of the beauties that myself and my organization brings to the table is we have the luxury of being stupid, right? I don't have to know the content of your company, right? I just have to know a process, and I have to know good questions to ask. So I play the Columbo, right? I ask the why question, and in the back of their head they're going, that's obvious. Well, when they have to explain how obvious it is, you'd be shocked how many times it isn't obvious. And why are you doing? Why is it done this way? Why is this that way? And when they go into explaining, getting you a history, explaining it, pretty soon it's like, you know what? Really, we don't have to do it that way. It's just the way we do it. Okay, well, have you thought about maybe is there another approach? Is there another way to doing it? Or do we even have to do it at all? Maybe that's what's holding you back, because it's this legacy process, this legacy product. Maybe that's actually more of an impediment than if you were to let it go. So we get the luxury of coming in. We tell people we expect them to be content experts, right? Understand their industry, understand how the delivery of the service is. We get to bring process experts together with our process, with their content. We're on this journey together to find a solution that can help them. So we don't have a dog in the hunt, right? Our success, whether I get paid, whether I are still employed, isn't dependent on whether my clients are successful or not. I want them to do it because I represent the Iowa economy. I'm hired to help make our economy stronger and better. And because of that, I'm able to look at it with a slightly different mindset and a motivation.
Right, but that's kind of like the value add that all consultants bring is this outside perspective, because everyone has a myopic view. I mean, I had this happen to me the other day when I was talking to a social media person. I was talking about all the different things I was doing, and she said, "Why?" And I'm like, "You're right. I haven't really thought it through. It's just I've been doing this for so long, and I've lost touch with the original reason for doing it the way I've been doing it." And I think a lot of companies are in that same position. Is like they're just driving forward the way they've always been doing it, and they don't realize they need to shift gears.
And that's a hard thing to do internally. Not impossible, but it's a hard thing to do. And even when you do it internally, so a lot of times companies will allocate resources, right? They'll tag somebody, Paul, you're tasked with being our chief innovation officer, or maybe it's not anything that formal. You're responsible for it. And oh, by the way, you're also our CFO or COO or whatever. And then they wonder why these things.
People just set up skunk works in the corner, right? They have like skunk works in the corner. They're like unauthorized people just like around doing other things.
Yeah, they can if they're passionate enough about it. What often happens is somehow it's been assigned them, and it may or may not be something that they're interested in, but frequently they don't have adequate resources. There's not clarity in terms of what the objectives that they're trying to accomplish. And oh, by the way, this little thing called authority, you have none, right? It still goes up to whoever the founder is or the senior leadership. So they don't really set these programs up to be successful. So we work with companies to help them think through what does an innovation initiative look like? And it could be something large and grandiose if that's where their passion and interest is, or it could be something more modest, right? I mean, we don't tell them what it has to be. That's not for us to decide any more than what their goals of their company is and their growth trajectory. That's for them to decide what their motives are. We're just there to help them, guide them through. And then we have the luxury, albeit we have to be careful how we do it, but we can say your baby's ugly, right? We don't have to buy the hype that goes with it. In fact, I would suggest the value add that we bring is that we are honest and objective. Now, there's a difference between honest and objective and opinionated. Nobody wants somebody who's opinionated, especially if their opinion isn't well thought out and conceived, right? So I had an experience with one of my startups. We had spent a ton of time, and actually it's relative to my industry, public sector, right? Because we tend to get a bad name, government workers, whether they care, they don't, and I had worked in the government setting like I did here at another institution, another university. And I went out to do this startup, and I said, well, gosh, they have these great resources. I'll invite them to come in. This one gal, scheduled time, an hour and a half, she came and listened to. We were trying to do a really innovative profit model, right? How we were going to monetize the item. We're in the asphalt equipment, heavy equipment industry. And so we brought her in, and she sat down. She asked probing questions. She did that. And then, at the end of the hour and a half, she stood up and basically gave us her opinion and then left. We're like, wait a minute, it's way more complicated than what we can share in an hour and a half. No, she'd done it, she'd heard enough, and she'd passed judgment. Well, I can tell you unequivocally that added no value. That did not help us. She wasn't from the industry. She had no perspective in that, and she wasn't willing to take the time. And I don't mean to suggest it's a gender thing. Guys do it all the time. In fact, sometimes guys are the worst about it, right? Seen this before. Well, I know how it's going to play out without even giving any full thought towards what's different or what's unique and how it might apply. So that's why I say we got to understand process. We have to help them, guide them through. There are these fundamental business principles that they have to be in alignment with. And again, these aren't Paul Kinghorn principles. These have been around for millennia. Our job is to help you see them, identify them, and then moreover, find workarounds to get around them when you hit up against them. Because you are going to hit up against, these challenges. So how you get around them is the difference between successful business owners and companies and entrepreneurs or those that continually struggle.
Well, I think especially because you're in the public sector, I think these companies are more open to working with you because they don't see you as a real threat, right? I mean, you're not for profit. You have a totally different reward system, et cetera. So they're probably more likely to work with you than they are to work with, other firms that could be partners.
That's true. I mean, there's no question that the university's name has a lot of clout, right? And the responsibility goes with it, right? When I was in business for myself, I was carrying my own water, and if I screwed up, then say bad things about me and my firm. But now, we got a lot more on the line, the reputation of the institution. But we also have a lot more resources, which I think a lot of people don't understand. They think of educational institutions, colleges and universities, mostly primarily, working with younger students for degree granted purposes, right? They don't realize that there are these outreach programs, and most universities have some aspect of it. Not all the things that we're doing at all universities for sure, but most of them are using and leveraging the resources, whether it's faculty resources or other government resources, to be able to help the economy as a whole, or help. It's not just the economy. I mean, it could be the environment, it could be social issues. It really is quite a fantastic resource and hidden gem that a lot of people don't realize. And if they reach out to and they see these company or these institutions and reach out to them, they'll find that it really is a bargain laden way to get what they need to help them and get them the successes, or at least on the pathway to success that they're hoping for.
No, that's interesting. I actually had no idea. I mean, I know that one of my clients was working with Stanford on an initiative, but I think they were expecting Stanford to pay for it. I didn't realize that there are colleges all over the country that have these outreach programs specifically for business. And do they work with any size businesses?
It depends. There's a lot of resources for the startup, geared towards the startup. Some towards larger companies. And some towards small and medium enterprises. So it really depends, in your state and in your locale. And some of the programs are free, don't cost anything. I mean, we're taxpayers, we're paying for it. And some of them have a modest, cost associated with them. But usually it's considerably less than what they would pay the private sector to have them help with that. But we're not trying to when we're out working, we're not trying to compete with the private sector. If we know that there's an entity out there that provides a service that can help somebody, we're collaborators, we're connectors. We do all we can to help and encourage, because at the end of the day, there's so much need and so many resources, we can't possibly serve everything that everybody has. And so the best value sometimes we can offer is to say, that's not us, and get you towards the right entity that can, with some assurance, to the extent that we can. We can't pick and choose companies, favored companies over another, but with some assurance that the list or the people we suggest you might want to reach out to are credible, right? So we can help kind of filter through some of the confusion if you're a business owner looking for some help and support.
Do you work with specific industries, or is it across the board?
Yeah, that's interesting. So we tell people that generally speaking, we're industry agnostic. So we work with any industry, although there are some industries, specifically because of certain programs, that we tend to support. So we have stuff that are targeting manufacturing as they're looking to roll, say, Industry 4.0 into the operation, and how important that is to the various tier one manufacturers that their supply chain aligns with and takes advantage of. And it's becoming more and more relevant that they used to be able to get by, just being hardworking and more available, but that's no longer the case. They really do have to interact with, and give some assurances of these various processes and technologies to be able to ensure that the manufacturing process is smooth all the way through. So manufacturing is one, and then it gets even more nuanced than that. We've got some programs that work with metal casting industry, right? Very specific subsegment of manufacturing as a whole. But by and large, when we talk about any of the other programs, whether it's family business, whether it's those that are looking to get some kind of a business transition strategy or growth, those principles apply across any industry. It doesn't matter what you're doing.
So do you specifically focus on businesses that are local?
So our programs predominantly serve the state of Iowa, just because how we're funded. But as we've grown, we've branched out, and we serve some of our programs the Midwest and across the country. So you can imagine there aren't a lot of metal casting suppliers, right? And so just by the sheer number, if we focus solely on casting operations in Iowa, it'd be a handful. But as we broaden that out to the upper Midwest, where about 40% of them reside, it gets a little bit larger if you go across the entire country.
Well, I love the fact that you're bringing more in manufacturing back, because I feel that all manufacturing is going to start becoming super local, with 3D printing and whatever happens. Is that we spend so much money shipping things all over the world. Why not build it where it is, especially with the technologies that we have today?
And so we have the luxury. One of our sister centers on our university's campus is the Metal Casting Center and the Additive Manufacturing Center. So they have very specific expertise, renowned throughout the world, in that area, and they help with the advancement of the techniques, the process, the application. So they have the technical expertise in that area. We have the business acumen to be able to help these companies think through what their core strategy and the implementation needs to be, and the culture piece that has to align and support that, coupled with their technical expertise. And now we've got a service offering that can really help these companies out. And that's what you tend to see at other universities, is there are centers or these mutually beneficial groupings that come together to provide a unique service offering, oftentimes to serve the state that they reside in. But as we, I consider myself to be somewhat innovative in how we approach things, right? As I go about doing things, I'm reaching out beyond that to make sure that we have more opportunities to continue to operate and succeed.
Very cool. Okay, so it's time to think like a futurist. It's the year 2031. It's 10 years from now. What's the world going to be like?
That's a good question. So, see, I'm not one who tend to get overly animated. I know that there's a lot of people who have this exponential thinking. And I can certainly see how that can apply. We are seeing things accelerate, no question about that, right? Are we going to see things significantly disrupted in 2030? I will leave it with this. To me, at the end of the day, you have to have some impetus that causes that causes the change, right? We are creatures of habit, and we are creatures that want, equilibrium. And when there's a major disruption, so this COVID thing could conceivably have done it had it completely gone sideways, and even longer, where we had to really challenge the way we think about how we're doing things, what we're doing, and where the value is. I thought the same thing back in the 07 through 09, the financial collapse that occurred there. Not that I was hoping that we would get worse. I wasn't. But until you get to a point where what we're doing can't work, and then we have to really find new ways, disruptive ways to do something different, we're going to have a hard time getting out of it. So I'm probably going to skew differently than a lot of your other guests. I'm going to suggest that there will be new ideas, new innovation that comes out that we haven't yet thought of, that in some cases will be pretty substantial. But I don't know that it's going to completely blow apart our world. I do think that with the virtual world that this COVID world has kind of ushered in, we'll see an exponential growth in how we interact with people from afar, and not just through things like Zoom contacts, but through some very innovative tools and techniques to be able to collaborate in much deeper, richer ways.
Interesting. So, I agree with you completely that it's some kind of crisis or some kind of disruption has to drive this kind of innovation. But do you ever think we're going to get ever back to a more of a steady state? Because I have this feeling that we're just going to have one disruption after another, after another. And this pile of disruptions is just going to eventually take us in a completely different direction. Do you think we're going to have this calm, steady state coming back again?
Yeah, now you're talking about chaos theory, and I love chaos theory. But one of the fundamental premises of chaos theory is that we're always looking to come back to this equilibrium, right? I mean, chaos is all over the place, but in the end, it comes back and it starts to level out. And what I hear you advocating, or not advocating, but suggesting is possibly that we never really get to that steady state. We get to the next crisis, and then that bips us off a little bit, and then the next one. I think you probably are right that a lot of these traditional systems that we have, way of doing things, are going to continually be challenged as new ideas, new innovation comes into the marketplace. Some of it driven by crisis, some of it driven just by new people that are thinking differently. You're already seeing somewhat of a challenge to status quo. I use, for instance, it used to be, when you and I were coming out of high school and starting our careers, right? You followed a very traditional, you go somewhere entry level, you get there, you work out, as you succeed and you show your merit, they'll promote you, and eventually your career makes this very,
Yeah, those days are gone. Those days are gone.
Right. Well, what you're seeing now is in certain areas, particularly like online, digital, the experts are the young people coming out, right? And so they don't have to do this very long career challenge. And so if you're older and like us, it feels very disruptive. Well, what happens when those people who are 20 something now become 30 and 40 somethings, and the kids that aren't even yet born are the new disruptors? And I think that you're going to start seeing, with the advent of artificial intelligence and the application of, that stuff across the board, it's just going to accelerate it up even faster. So I will say this, I do think that it'll, I think 10 years maybe is too close, but if you go 20 years out, we will see some really significant changes that we are having a hard time mentally getting around, but for which will be the normal status quo of people's lives in that time period. So, yeah, and it's not all bad. Some of it can be negative, but a lot of it's a great opportunity. I look at the smartphone. 30 years ago, you ask anybody about the idea of would we need a smartphone, we'd all say, why do I need a smartphone? I got one at home and I got one in the office. Now, can you imagine what your day's like if you forget it and you have to go around the entire day without access to your smartphone? It drives you nuts.
Oh yeah, it's a completely different world. It's crazy. Yeah, so this is fantastic. Thank you so much. This has been great. Now, if somebody wants to get in touch with you, what's the best way?
So you can go to our website, cbgi.uni.edu, or advanceiowa.com. and you can learn more about our programs and our services. We're happy to talk to anybody, and we have partners and resource connectors across the entire country. So we're happy to point them to some other institution if we think that would be a better fit for them, and make those introductions for them as well.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much. It's been great talking to you. Talk to you soon.
Absolutely. Thanks. You too.
Thank you. Bye-bye.